Rabbil Alameen. All right, everybody, here we are in session number 30. Just a second here. Just finished polishing these glasses real quickly before we start. Hope everybody had a good week. Because weather has been very bizarre here. We've been getting these superstorms coming in almost like every night here in Brisbane, which is kind of evidence of our global climate change in action. So I don't know what the deniers are going to say to some of the hail that we've been having. There was even a funnel about 2 weeks ago that came through one of these storms in the middle of downtown Brisbane here. So here we are. Okay. We are on chapter number 24. There's not much left to go. The wisdom of leadership, Hikmat al-Imamiyya fi kalama Haruniyya, the word of Aaron. He says, know that the existence of Aaron derived from the realm of the divine mercy, according to his saying, we bestowed on him, meaning Moses, of our mercy, his brother Aaron, a prophet. His prophethood derived from the realm of the divine mercy, since while he was greater than Moses in age, Moses was greater than him in prophethood. It was because Aaron's prophethood derived from the divine mercy that Moses said to his brother, O son of my mother. We let this other person in. Addressing him by reference to his mother and not his father, since mercy pertains to the mother more than the father and is more profuse in its effect. There's, although, we get 4 different theories from the commentators about this particular angle, this is a very important statement by Ibn Arabi because it essentially equates mercy, Rahmaniyya, and also by implication the Nafas al-Rahmaniyya, and all the realms that are directly associated with it that we have previously discussed with motherhood. So this means that even not just that the soft caring aspects are pertaining to the mother, but also the creative aspect is now being implicitly associated with motherhood. So that then Rahma is the manifestation of God in its motherhood, as it were. Right? So, but for this mercy, she would not have the patience to persevere in the rearing of her children. Then Aaron said, do not seize me by my beard nor my hair, and do not give my enemies occasion to gloat over me. All of this is a breath of mercy. The reason being that Moses had not looked carefully enough at the tablets he had cast from his hands. This refers to Moses coming down from Sinai, finding the children of Israel had descended into idolatry and had constructed for themselves a golden calf that they were worshiping. Had he done so, he would have found in them guidance and mercy, and they would have made clear to him how the affair that angered him had occurred, and that Aaron was innocent of it. The mercy was on his brother, since he did not seize him by the beard in view of his people because of his advanced age, and because Aaron was older than Aaron's plea. Aaron was older than he. Aaron's plea was an act of kindness to his brother, since his prophethood derived from the divine mercy, and only such considerate behavior was to be expected from him. Then Aaron said to Moses, I fear lest you should accuse me of dividing the children of Israel. That is to say, that you might make me the cause of their division, which was in fact the worship of the golden calf. Some of those who worshipped it did so in emulation of as-Samari, while others held back from that so that they might consult Moses on the matter on his return. Mr. Cantor-Dagley has incorrectly translated as-Samari to the Samaritan. This is an incorrect association. The Samaritans are not the same as the Samari of the Quran, right? And this name as-Samari only seems to appear in the Islamic and the Quranic literature as the identity of that actor who constructed the golden calf and told the children of Israel to worship. The Samaritans are a completely different group. So this association by Mr. Dagley is incorrect. Aaron feared that Moses would attribute their division to him. Moses, however, knew more of the matter than did Aaron, knowing that it was that the followers of the golden calf were really worshiping, being aware that God had ordained that none might be worshipped save him alone, and that what God ordained surely happens. His rebuke to his brother was because of his impulsive rejection of the affair, as also his lack of adequacy to the occasion. The Gnostic is one who sees God in everything, and indeed he sees him as the essence of everything. Thus, it was Moses who was teaching Aaron, although he was younger than his brother. Now, there's several different points occurring here all simultaneously. Bezeli, in his commentary, when he gets to this specific part of it, has a very interesting observation, right? Why do the prophets, and especially in this particular case of Moses, rebuking the children of Israel for worshiping a golden calf? If we are saying that al-Haq, the truly real, inhabits every form and is their essence, then what is the purpose of rebuking them? And the answer he provides is quite interesting. He says that when the prophets and the saints rebuke certain people, the generality of people for idolatry, it isn't because that these saints and prophets are unaware of the inhabitation of the truly real and its self-disclosure in these idols, is because these people who are worshiping an idol are blind to the totality of the presence of God in all things. The prophets and the saints see the manifestation of God in everything, but these others don't. And so what these idolaters are doing, in essence, is circumscribing the divine presence in only a particular locus, rather than understanding that the truly real inhabits the totality of Lakai everywhere, right? This is a very, very important point, because if we don't underscore this fact, right, then all kinds of charges of contradiction and whatnot, or even hypocrisy by one particular locutor one time online with me, to Ibn Arabi, that Ibn Arabi is not only contradicting himself, that he's being hypocritical, but the commentators say, no, that is not the case, because they are not understanding the difference between the Gnostics' vision of the totality of the real and the reality being everywhere, as opposed to the idolater who has no comprehension of that whatsoever and is circumscribing it. That is the difference. So whereas the saint and the prophet understand the all comprehensive nature of Tawheed, right? And it recognizes, affirm it, and acknowledge it, these others are trying to circumscribe in their idolatry that reality into a single thing. And that is where the rebuke occurs, and why such rebukes are necessary, on the part of the prophets and the saints. He goes on to say, therefore, when Aaron said to him, he returned to As-Samari and said, what have you to say, O Samari, regarding his action making the form of a calf from an enemy, meaning the devil, fashioned from the treasuries of the people, thus stealing their hearts for the sake of their wealth? Jesus said to the children of Israel, O children of Israel, every man's heart is where his wealth is. Let therefore your wealth be in heaven, so that your hearts may be there also. He only calls the wealth mal, because it is something that by its very nature inclines, kumilu, hearts to worship, being by far the most desired object by reason of the heart's need for it. Forms, however, do not endure, and the form of the calf would undoubtedly have disappeared had not Moses been so quick to burn it. In his great zeal, he burned it and cast the ashes of that form into the sea. Then he said to As-Samari, look now upon your God, calling it a god to reinforce his instruction, knowing well that it was an aspect of divine manifestation. He said, I will surely burn it, thus reinforcing the point that Bezeli underscores in his commentary on this particular section. Human animality exercises a certain influence on that of the animal by virtue of the fact that God has subjected it to man, and not least because his true origin is not animal. The calf, however, was even more subject, since what is inanimate has no will of its own and is at man's disposal without any resistance on its part. If an animal has the power to offer resistance, it becomes obstinate against what man wants from it. If it has no such power, or if the man's wish happens to coincide with that of the animal, it may then be led submissively to comply with his wish. Similarly, men, like such an animal, may be persuaded to obey some command regarding that by which God has raised them above the animals, for the sake of some gain he hopes for from his compliance. Such gain is sometimes called wages, as in a saying, he has raised some of you several degrees above others, so that some might subject others. A man is subject to another only in his animality, not in his humanity, since two similars are mutually exclusive. The superior man might subject another by status, through wealth or reputation, that is to say, by his humanity, but the other is subject to him, whether through fear or greed, only by his animality and not by his humanity. This is a very, very important point to remember, by the way. It's an extremely subtle point. One similar is not subject to another, in which respect one has only to consider the mutual conflict among animals by reason of their similarity, similars being mutually exclusive. This is why he said, and he has raised some of you above others in degree. The one above not being as the one below in degree. This shows that subjection is a matter of degree. Subjection is of two kinds. The first being the subjection of the will to him who subjects by overpowering the will of the subjected one. This is like the subjection of the slave by his master, even if they be alike in their humanity, or like the subjection by the ruler of his subjects. Thus, even if they are his equals in their humanity, he subjects them by degree. The second kind is subjection by circumstance, as with the subjection of a people to the king who orders their affairs, defending them, protecting them, fighting their enemies, and preserving their property and persons. In the case of this subjection by circumstance, the subjects in a way subject the ruler. Properly speaking, it is called subjection by rank, which rank governs him, right? This is also, implicitly now glossing for us one angle to understand as to how the immutable archetypal essences are actually influencing the Godhead itself in their existentiation, protection, or whatever context you want to look at the issue. Some kings strive for their own ends, while others realize the truth of the matter and know that by rank they are inevitably in subjection to their own subjects, because they recognize their power and right to their service. God rewards such a one as he rewards those who know things as they truly are. The recompense of such a person is incumbent on God as being involved in the affairs of his servants. Indeed, the whole cosmos subjects by circumstance one who cannot properly be called subjected. As he has said, every day it is upon some new task. Aaron's lack of effective power to restrain the followers of the calf by gaining mastery over it, as Moses did, is a wisdom from God made manifest in the created world, so that he might be worshipped in every form. Indeed, even if that form disappears thereafter, it doesn't so only after it has been for its worshippers clothed in divinity, so that every kind of thing is at some time worshipped as divine or dominant, and every intelligent person can realize that this must be the case. Nothing in the cosmos is worshipped, however, except it assumes for the worshipper a certain sublimity and enjoys a certain degree in his heart. Thus, God is called the lofty in degrees, or the elevator of degrees, or Rafi ad-darajat, and not lofty in degree, one degree, since he has made many degrees in one essence. Thus, and this is articulating now the articulations of being, that yes, being is one, but its articulations are infinite and have degrees. Thus, also, he has ordained that none but he should be worshipped in many different degrees, and that each degree should become a context for the divine self-manifestation in which it or he is worshipped. The greatest and most sublime of these is passion, hawa, which is such an amazing point, this, right? As he says, do you not consider him who has taken his passion as a god? It is indeed the greatest object of worship, since nothing can be worshipped without it, nor can it be worshipped without his essence. Concerning this, I say, by the truth of passion, or hawa, surely passion begets passion. And but for the passion in the heart, hawa, it would not be worshipped. Now just remember, the word hawa, right, means passion, means longing, means desire, means all of these things in Arabic, right? So longing, desire, passion is the basis of all things in the subject. In my own effulgences of wisdom in the chapter of Eve, I even predicate this as the very motivation for creation itself, passion, right? That the desire of the hidden treasure to know itself even extends to it in its passion to be known as other than itself. So this is what Ibn Arabi is putting his finger on here. By the truth of passion, surely passion begets passion, and thus for passion in the heart, it would not be worshipped. Do you not consider how perfect and complete is God's knowledge of things, and how it accomplishes its will in the case of one who worships his passion and makes of it a god? He says, God has caused him to err knowingly, error being confusion. Thus he sees that the worshiper worships only his passion because he is driven to obey its urge to worship whatever he worships. Indeed, even his worship of God is motivated by passion or desire, since had he no passion or desire for the divine holiness, which is the will to love, he would not worship God or prefer him to another. The same is the case with everyone who worships some cosmic form and adopts it as a god, since it is only by passion that he can regard it in this way. Every worshiper is under the rule of passion, or hawa. Then the worshiper begins to see that among those who worship, the objects of worship are various, and the worshiper, just a second, waiting for this. Sorry about that. Then the worshiper begins to see that among those who worship, the objects of worship are various, and the worshiper of some particular objects of worship accuses those who worship anything else of infidelity. Thus, those who have any awareness become confused because of the universality of this passion. Indeed, the oneness of passion being the same in every worshiper. So while the passion, the desire is one throughout all creation and all created things, its outward manifestations differ from person to person to person, so that then the entirety of all religious argumentation or philosophical or ideological even argument between husbands and wives and couples and lovers and all of that becomes merely an outer formality, because the passion that animates both subject and object is simultaneously the same thing, right? This is what is being said. God caused him to err. That is, he confused him knowingly, in that every worshiper serves only his passion, by which alone he is moved to worship, whether it conforms to the sacred law or not, right? Remember the point I made last week about, that once you reach a certain status, whether you pray in one form or another form is identically the same thing. The perfect Gnostic is one who regards every object of worship as a manifestation of God in which he is worshipped. They call it a god, although its proper name might be stone, wood, animal, man, star, or angel. Although that might be its particular name, divinity presents a level of reality that causes the worshiper to imagine that it is its object of worship. In reality, this level is the self-manifestation of God to the consciousness of the worshiper of the object in this particular mode of manifestation. Because of this, certain people ignorantly said, we worship them only that they might bring us nearer to God. But calling them gods, when they said, would he make the gods into one God? Surely this is an amazing thing. They were not rejecting him, but showed their amazement being limited to a notion of multiple forms and the attribution of divinity to them. This completely throws any arguments about theological idolatry on its head. Then the apostle came and summoned them to one God, who, although recognized, was not affirmed by them, having shown that they confirmed him and believed in him by their own words. We worship them only that they might bring us nearer to God, right? Knowing that those forms were of stone, wood, tree, whatever. Thus, the argument was brought against them with this saying, so name them, which is actually what God says to the angels regarding the reality of things. They, however, named them only in such a way as to suggest that their name possessed the reality. As for the Gnostics, who know things as they truly are, they display an attitude of rejection toward the worship of forms, because their degree of knowledge makes them aware that they are, by the authority of the apostle in whom they believe and through whom they are called, believers subject to the rule of time. Thus, despite their awareness that the polytheists do not worship the forms themselves, but only God in them, by the dominance of the divine self-manifestation, they discern in them they are nevertheless servants of their time. Which is quite a point, because what it is doing here, it is relativizing the divine dispensation, or the the religious form as such, which is very interesting argument, but one that drives dogmatic religious people up the wall when they read it. The rejecter, who has no knowledge of how he manifests himself, is completely unaware of this, since the true Gnostic hides all this from the prophet, the apostle, and their heirs. So now the distinction is being made between the apostles and heirs and the Gnostics. This they do, adhering to the apostle and seeking the love of God, as he says, say, if you love God, then follow me, and God will love you. He is summoning to a God who is eternally restored to, universally known, but not seen. Sight cannot reach him, but he reaches all sights, by virtue of his subtlety and permeation in the essence of things. The eyes cannot see him, just as they cannot see the spirits that govern their shapes and outer forms. He is the subtle, the experience being immediate tasting, which is his self-manifestation, that is the forms. Both they and he are necessary, just as the one who sees him through his passion must worship him, if only you should comprehend, and to God does the path lead. And that was the chapter of Aaron. Now the floor is open to question, comments, anything you want to talk about, rants, revelations. This is an interesting chapter. He kind of brings several different threads that he's already been talking about in the previous chapter to a kind of puts them in a very interesting angle of things. Anyway, whoever wants to go first, floor is all yours. Come on, people. Don't be shy. Sin, you want to go first at all?
I think Zachariah wanted to go.
Okay, Zachary, you don't have to, just go.
Yeah, sorry. I think I'm having a bit of audio issue.
Okay.
I just wanted to ask you to clarify, is when he's saying the passion and he's talking about that, is he talking about the same concept as the God made in your own belief that he was talking about earlier? Is it kind of the same, or is it something that is a bit different? I'm trying to understand that.
Very discerning, yes and no. And between the yes and no, there's a very fine thread that cannot be explained, in my opinion, any other way but experience and the suluk. But yes, for our purposes, I would say they are the same thing right now, because the gods created in the beliefs on the one hand are illusory, right? But on another hand, in one of the previous chapters, he told us they're also created before a given existent becomes fully existent, right? So that God created in the belief comes with the subject into the world, right? Here he's kind of even refining this idea even further and saying that passion, Hawa, rules the everything. Everything is, that exists in sentient beings is governed by this, rule of passion. And were it not for the passion, God would not be known, God would not be worshipped, because that is the impulse. That inner impulse is the passion, right? That guides, whether to the straight path or to the path, to another path or whatnot. So the sacred, as far as Ibn Arabi is concerned, is governed by this principle of passion. And we have a word, for example, in Arabic, or technical term in Sufism, that's taken from Arabic, jazba, right? The ecstatic attraction. Jazba is a very important term, technical term in Sufism, because it explains this desire, this passion of a given Gnostic for the one worship, for the ma'bud, right? And the other side of this is what guides us is that very passion. Without any passion, without any hawa, there is no jazb, right? So the leaven of being magnetized or being ecstatically attracted to God is this passion. In other words, what Ibn Arabi is saying is that the difference between the animate and the inanimate is this passion. Why? Because God himself or self itself, whatever, desires to be known, right? So God's even desire is passionate, has that substance of hawa in it. He doesn't say this explicitly, but this is the implication. I make this more explicit in my own writing about this issue. So yes, passion is in a sense the God created in the beliefs. From another angle, we could say that the passion, the hawa, is the substrate wherein the God created in the beliefs emerges, self-manifests, right? And this God created in the beliefs can take on an infinite variety of contents, of outward content, could be anything. Anything. I mean, from this point of view, and I've used this, by the way, I've kind of broken this down in kind of counseling sessions, that your addictions, all of that kind of stuff, they all have a passionate basis, right? Your desire, your passion, your passionateness is also what gives birth to these addictions, whether it be, tobacco, drugs, sex, you name it. I mean, the infinite contents of addictions can be many. So what Ibn Arabi is saying that on the one hand, this has a neutral and even a positive element to it, right? But on the other hand, whatever, on a very, limited level, taqyidi level is perceived as being negative, also has its genesis in the passion as well. So passion guides everything. This is the animate motivation and the propeller for everything that is animate, and especially that which then takes all animate things to their God, to their, to their creator.
Okay, and that kind of it helps clarify things, but I just essentially for me, as he goes, he talks about how the Gnostic takes an attitude of rejection towards the worship of forms. So essentially, they're mastering their passion, and then in this sense, do they only prefer transcendence? Is that what's going on here?
Let's without getting too drowned in the linguistics of this, let's put it this way, right? What the Gnostics is attempting to do is to fine-hone their passion to a single object. The problem between those who are unawake and those who are awake is that their passions can take a multiplicity of contents as it focuses and gets lost in this multiplicity, right? Ibn Arabi is saying that the ultimate object of the passion is the same thing, right? In whatever content it comes into. But the difference between the unaware and the aware is that the aware know this. So for them, it doesn't matter whether their object of passion is a woman, if it is a book, if it is a tree, stone, whatever, because they understand that behind this, that what animates this is the eternal itself. Whereas the one who is unawake, the masses, the awam in the world, they are just jumping from object to object to object, being guided with that passion, without understanding what the propeller, what the object, true object, and subject behind all of these contents actually is. That's the difference. This is also goes back to the original argument at the very beginning of the chapter that I said Kaysari put his finger on, the difference between the rebuke of the unawake, the rebuke of standard exoteric religious people, and the rebuke of a Gnostic or a prophet and a saint on the issue of idolatry. This is the same thing, right? The Gnostic prophet and saint understands the totality that God is al-Muhit. It contains all things, encompasses all things. The unawake doesn't realize that, right? So what the unrealized does is that they circumscribe. They try to take the divinity and fit it into a very narrow focus without understanding the greater ontological implications of what they're doing, and kind of implicitly believing that outside of that little container that they have put God into, there's a vacuum where God is not. Okay? And this also then operates by the same logic about passion, Hawa itself. That is the difference between the Gnostic and those who are not. And this is why then at the end of the chapter, he qualifies, and it's a very subtle point, a very controversial point, about the Gnostics who are operating under the umbrella of a divine dispensation, whether this be Islam, Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, whatever it is.
That makes sense. But there's also another thing here because you kind of touched on the first kind of blasphemous thing that's in here, but there's also something that I guess kind of gets lost. There's a third category that he introduces in the last paragraph, which is the rejector, which is somebody who's halfway, he's part of, he follows the prophet and but he doesn't have that knowledge, the knowledge that in fact that the divine is in that form. So it's kind of is this a subtle sort of reference to the companions of the prophet, the people around him, that's what I'm thinking, because then if you look at it from that perspective, then it's essentially those people are just they've turned the prophet into a passionate an idol or an object of worship essentially, and they're just following without grasping the inner sort of reality of that.
Yeah. The emulators that Ibn Arabi has a terrible problem with, because they have no tasting, they have no experience. They are either operating by consensus, or if they're really intelligent, then they're only operating at the level of the intellect and nothing beyond it. They have no realization. They don't know the reality of things as they truly are. Heard that prayer of the prophet. Yes.
Okay, thanks. That makes sense.
Just continuing this same thing. I mean, this is such an interesting chapter. I guess I'm just wondering, the difference between the Gnostic who knows the reality behind the thing that he's worshiping, and the person who tries to squeeze all of divinity into the one thing. I guess just from a practical standpoint, I'm wondering how one makes the shift from one to the other, because I don't think the solution is to just say, oh, that's shirk and you shouldn't do that. And just you could be very Sharia oriented and that kind of thing. But it seems like just practically it might be an easier transition to go from, oh, this thing that you're worshiping, that's not bad. It's don't reject that person's worship, because that is their passion. It's where it's leading them to, but somehow get them to see beyond it, or I don't know if that's an intellectual kind of
move
to make. Or
you put your finger on a very important subtle point, and this is my take about Aaron vis-a-vis Moses in this chapter, because whether you read the translation, but especially the Arabic, what Ibn Arabi is trying to say here is that what you just put your finger on is essentially what Aaron's role in that incident of the golden calf becomes. because Aaron did not interfere. He may have said, don't do this. And then once they did it, just sat back, right? Although Aaron had authority from Moses and according to the commentators from God simultaneously. He had the unlimited imama according to Qaisari from God, and then the Muqayyadi imama from Moses himself. So he had responsibility from both sides, from the contingent and the atemporal simultaneously. And he chose to basically sit back and allow these Israelites to worship the golden calf. Moses had the problem with it, right? So what Ibn Arabi is subtly suggesting here is that in this situation, the true Gnostic, who is really seeing everything in its panorama, is actually Aaron and not Moses. Even though, technically Moses's rank is higher, because he's the Nabi Tashri, he's the legislative prophet, and Aaron isn't. But Ibn Arabi is suggesting that in this situation, with Aaron basically sitting back and letting these Israelites do what they did, is actually the correct position. Because, he knows that while they're wrong, but they're also right. So, why rain on their parade? Let them do their thing.
That was a little bit different from the way that I was reading it. I mean, I didn't read the commentaries, but I thought it was that Moses, because there's that line, his rebuke to his brother was because of Aaron's impulsive rejection of the affair, as also his lack of adequacy. It was like, I thought it was an inversion of the typical interpretation.
Well, it is an inversion of the typical interpretation, but there's a kind of a tongue-in-cheek element going on here with Ibn Arabi when you go further into the chapter, especially then the points that he raises afterwards. Moses is the prophet. Aaron is technically his wali, right, to Moses. So he a wali in terms of as the keeper of the law has even a bigger responsibility than the Nabi. The Nabi's responsibility is to reveal the law. The wali's responsibility is the maintenance of it as its expositor. And if you take the whole botany dictum, then the wali's esoteric station is higher because he is the responsibility of the ta'wil, whereas the prophets is the responsibility of the tanzil. So, in this situation, the question arises, as the commentators of not just the commentators of the Fusus, but the Quranic commentators, Mufassirun, why did Aaron sit on his hands and not do anything, even though he was a prophet and was responding as also Moses' wali? Ibn Arabi, tongue-in-cheek, is kind of suggesting that this is the reason. That he left them to their devices because what was he to do? He is also God blown. He's a majzub. He sees that the haq is in every form, and technically at the moment where Moses is absent, the law has not even descended yet. Moses at the time where Moses is in the process of receiving the law from God, this incident occurs where the children of Israel are worshiping the golden calf. So Aaron is completely blameless, and he begins by discussing the realm at which Aaron is operating. He calls it, rahamut, right? Rather than just rahma, rahamut is the same. It's kind of making a noun out of rahma, making a realm out of the rahma. Just like we have jabarut, malakut, etc. Ibn Arabi uses the term rahamut at the very beginning of the chapter, such that Aaron's entire the locus at which he's operating out of is that rahamut itself. And this is quite significant, I mean, in my reading, because it's placing Aaron's position in this particular incident at a far higher vantage point than even Moses. And then whatever other explanations that come out of this are sort of tongue-in-cheek on the part of Ibn Arabi, in my opinion. That's how I'm reading it.
Okay. Well, so then Moses, I guess I'm still following my reading. I thought he ultimately at least understood what was going on. That this is divinity, but then there's the problem of the temporality of the form, and that's why it has to be burned.
Yeah.
I don't know if I completely understand that either, because it's like, so what is that just a circumstantial response to idolatry, or is that
Yes, that's a
universal response?
no. That's that. Well, Ibn Arabi is suggesting it has to be a circumstantial response, because if it's a universal response, then that negates the universality of the divine presence, right? So it has to be a circumstantial one, not a universal one. Also remember this: Ibn Arabi fundamentally defines himself as a Khidrian, as a follower of the path of Khidr, right? And from the Quran, we know that Khidr just completely revealed Moses' ignorance in three different, very significant instances. And as we're getting closer to the chapter of Moses, even though that's a great chapter in and of itself, but here especially, there's kind of this Khidrian presence in this dynamic between Aaron and Moses going on. But he's doing it in a very subtle way, if you know what I mean. And that's why he underscores the point there about Aaron telling Moses, don't embarrass me in front of these people. Don't pull my beard, don't rebuke me. Right? And then we get into the whole metaphysical and ontological discussion about, all of this and the passion, etc.
Yeah, that makes sense, because to me it seemed like he was doing his thing where he kind of exposits a really esoteric doctrine and then goes back and lapses back into something really orthodox all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Towards the end, I was like, well, what's going on there?
This is Ibn Arabi in everything he writes.
Yeah.
That's his escape clause, his insurance policy.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. There's just a small technical detail. I don't have a question. I just thought it was interesting. I was looking at the language. That one passage from 247 on to 248 says that the people who worship the idols, they recognize God, but they don't affirm God, because to say that they see the divinity in the one form that they're worshiping, they just don't see the unity behind it, the transcendence behind it. Just in terms of the technical language, it's ya'rafu.
Yeah.
So they have irfan, but they don't have, and the other one is yushhadu, so they don't have shuhud.
Yeah.
So just I guess we could call that irfan, that experience that anyone has of just being so passionate about a person or a thing, even if they don't believe in God, they're basically divinizing the thing. That is gnosis.
Yes.
Right. But then this seems to create a hierarchy between gnosis and witnessing, where witnessing is beyond that, and that's when you see all the
witnessing is the witnessing, the shuhud is the culmination. It's the if we look at the trajectory of the gnosis as a cone, right? So everything that is around this cone as one is traveling is the gnosis itself. But the point at which this is culminated is that's actual shuhud itself. You must see. And that shuhud is the tasting, obviously, in its culmination. So it's also a very subtle criticism of some of the masters and their novices who may be on the path. They may know a lot of things, but they don't have the shuhud behind it, which makes them incomplete at the same time.
So I don't know if this is probing too much, but I'm still wondering, just I guess phenomenologically, what makes the difference? How do you transition from the gnosis into that culminating point? Even if you're someone who doesn't believe in God, you're still divinizing something.
Yes.
So I just still wonder, is it some kind of intellectual concept? It's there's actual God behind this.
No, I mean, I think the Surat al-Najm gives us that answer, where the prophet beholds the divine presence at Qaba Qawsin or Adna, at 2 bones length or near. That is the model. So if we're going to talk about shuhud, well, then what constitutes the shuhud? What constitutes the culmination of the ma'rifah, where you have reached that ain al-yaqeen? That is it. That verse from Surah al-Najm. That's what it means. because this was also the prophet's own experience on the night of the Mirage.
Okay, so I imagine that it depends on the individual situation and guiding a particular person through. I'm thinking of like psychological projections. Like,
Yeah,
there would be some kind of process that you would have to go through, maybe a long-term,
just
many-year process. Or
remember this, and this is where in a lot of these Sufi texts, whether we're talking about Ibn Arabi or many of the other masters before, like Qushayri and his famous Risala, etc. They constantly talk about the pitfalls of the path, not just about the pitfalls of the path among the people who are not on it, or even the novices, but especially the people who are deep into the path. That at every point of the path, there are pitfalls, right? And so you read this even in poets like Rumi, etc. There are certain masters or certain novices or acolytes who think that they have attained the highest ranks of gnosis and tasting, and they haven't. They're still operating at some level here. So this is what Ibn Arabi is kind of very subtly kind of indicating, that unless there is that shuhud, which is also synonymous with the dhawq, right, that you're not there. And your situation is sort of like these Qurayshites at the time of the Prophet during the early Meccan period, where they said, well, we recognize Allah as the chief God, but what about his three daughters? Or these other deities housed in the Kaaba? And so this is what Ibn Arabi is trying to kind of underscore, that even those Gnostics are kind of analogous to those kinds of idolaters at the time of the Prophet in their own context. They're not complete yet. They still have a way to go. They need to make all of these gods into one. That's such a great verse. That's from I think it's from, if I remember correctly, it's from the first verse of Surah As-Sad, right? So this making of all the gods into the single deity as being a wondrous thing is the point of the exercise, which means that making all of these passions that accrue on the path with a group of given Gnostics, they're then find home into that single object of focus, which is al-Haq.
okay, thanks.
I have a question.
Go for it, Vanessa.
Do you think that what happened, like that monotheism was supposed to liberate us from the calf and see God in all things, and then they just transferred that kind of henotheism from the calf to the idea of God, and it
100%. They
became exclusionary?
110%. Yes, they did.
Mm.
And this, in a sense, is almost an inevitable historical and sociological development and phenomena. It's something that cannot be stopped unless you're dealing with people who are traveling and who are on an esoteric path, who are Gnostics, who are traveling to the reality itself. Yeah. But on the plane of history and the horizontal plane of history, yes, 100% monotheism, and especially in the three Abrahamic forms of it, evolved into precisely forms of idolatry. And we see it in many of its iterations. Yeah.
How do you reconcile the sort of esoteric knowledge that God is in all things, and that passion is driving all things, even things we consider to be evil, to realize themselves, and then the need to discriminate between what is like helpful or harmful to us in life? Like if you see there's one thing to see God in all things, another thing to see goodness in all things, even though you could equate them, but that one has to have boundaries around like being predated on or whatever,
Yeah, of
you know.
course.
So
Yeah.
can you sort of, do you think that's more an exoteric consideration, or do you think that, I mean, I don't really see how it can be separable
Well,
because
it straddles both worlds. This what you're putting your finger on straddles on both sides of the equation of things. This is why at the very end of this chapter, Ibn Arabi says what he says. He's suggesting that on the one hand, the Gnostics understand that the truly real is in everything, but because they're also subjects of time, and the time is ruled by a particular divine dispensation, then it is incumbent upon the Gnostics to then put themselves under the rules of that religious dispensation, which for Ibn Arabi is Islam, which means that because they are following the prophet as the path to the all high, therefore they are willingly subjecting themselves to this monotheistic kind of context of being in the world, the Abrahamic monotheistic context, as opposed to something else, even though they realize that even this in itself is ultimately relative in the face of that totality. But they do so also from another reason that Ibn Arabi here isn't discussing, but it discusses at length throughout his Futuhat al-Makkiyah, is that, look, we can traverse all these stages and way stations and witness and have all these self-disclosure, but nevertheless, so long as we are alive in a body, we are here in the spatio-temporal world subject to its laws, right? We cannot throw our hands up and say everything goes, because if we do that, we're operating from a place of ego and selfishness, right? So the Gnostic, in a sense, has a responsibility to maintain the balances of things on all levels, whether it be on their level of their disclosure from the realms of the real, where none of the rules that operate down here below even apply. But by the same token, because they're embodied in this world, they have a responsibility to maintain those laws, as so long as those laws don't become toxic as they have now, right? So long as that they are agents of balance and equilibrium, then, and if they're subject to that particular dispensation, then they apply those laws or interpret those laws, or apply the Sharia in such a way that is different from the way that, like, the Islamists or these exotericists apply the Sharia, because they're not reifying it. They're not turning the Sharia into a god. The Sharia is just a context. It's just the apparel on this path to the ultimate reality. It is transparent.
would you say that basically whatever laws protect life, like the persistence of life in this world, would be considered what is good ultimately? That could,
Yes.
if you recognize that, you can change the context.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and he says these sorts of things, and also this is the intuitive position to take if you're a true Gnostic, that in another cultural context, another set of languaging applies to what this actually means. So in the Islamic context, it may be the Sharia. If we move to the Hindu Buddhist context, we're talking about the Dharma.
Mm-hmm.
And if we have an indigenous context, then whatever in the indigenous Aboriginal context is the law, in the way that the Aborigines understand that concept of law, the organic law of the land.
Yep.
That is the Sharia for these people.
Because, I mean, the anything goes thing, you kind of end up basically in, well, Satanism, for want of a better word. Like, if you decide that everything is God, then you can just do anything.
Well, and this is what, Rumi, if you remember that very humorous story in the Masnavi, which I've told a couple of times, is criticizing. He tells that story of that calendar that, steals into this old man's garden and starts helping himself to the old man's fruit, the fruit that this old man has grown. because he believes he's God and he's not subject to any rules. The old man sees it, comes up with a walking stick and starts beating the hell out of the calendar over the head. The calendar says, what are you doing, old man? And calendar says, well, if you believe that you are God, I am also God beating God. Get out of my garden.
Right.
Right? But
Right.
this is what Rumi is criticizing. And this is what Ibn Arabi is now kind of subtly telling us, that yes, well, we know this and we have tasted it and witnessed it, yet still, because we are in spatiotemporality, we must subject ourselves to its laws for the benefit of others. So this is, in a sense, the bodhisattva argument from the side of Sufism.
Mm-hmm.
That the maintenance of the law as such is for the benefit of the other sentient beings here, for their liberation and their preservation and all of that.
Would you say that is discipline? That's where the discipline comes in terms of not just doing anything, which is quite unpopular now. Sometimes I think, when people say they're spiritual, what they mean is they don't want to do discipline,
Well,
any kind of restraint is viewed as a downer.
Well, that whole Byron Shire crowd that you and I have locked horns with for so many years. These people are libertarians and they're kind of sublimating their political libertarianism for their spirituality. I don't take most of these people seriously.
Sure. It's a Christianity created a lot of refugees in that sense, I guess, but one can successfully argue that, when the context changes, that those laws are no longer relevant. And some of them aren't. So that's kind of where we're at, where it's all been thrown out. And there's a lot of anti-religious sentiment.
Another way to look at it, which is the basic argument of the Bayan, is that from age to age, as humanity evolves, a new set of laws and legislations are necessary.
Yeah.
So in other words, we have an ever-evolving Sharia rather than a static one, where each age then established its own Sharia, as it were, based on the contingencies of the time, such that the Sharia of 1400 years ago may not apply to the circumstances that we are living in today. So a new Sharia is needed.
Well, for everyone, really, for all cultures.
Yeah.
But do you see that being practiced anywhere successfully in your observation of Sharia that is like?
I have seen iterations of this amongst some of the Iranian Sufi orders or the Bayanis. So yes, but it is not universal, just for the simple fact that in the Islamic world there are establishments with their very lockjawed interpretations of what the Sharia is, and if there's any deviation or difference to the way that is practiced, it's punished very violently often, which is one of the problems with our part of the world. That kind of approach is usually very harshly, even though we have figures such as Ibn Arabi who said that is the wrong approach 800 years ago. But yeah, there are enclaves of them. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hello, I've got a question.
Go for it.
So there is this passage about people becoming infatuated with things, and basically, it basically talked about what exactly shirk is. So what happens when somebody gets very infatuated with somebody romantically, and they sort of project, because there's ideas, I guess, in Jungian psychology, when somebody gets very infatuated with, when a woman gets very infatuated with a man, she says that she's, or vice versa, they're projecting their anima or animus, which in turn represent their inner feminine or inner masculine. So I was wondering what the take here would be on that, because obviously Allah has masculine and feminine qualities.
For most of this tradition of Sufism, this is a wonderful occurrence if it occurs for somebody that they actually, because the root of romance for Sufism, this is very different to the perspective on romance that you get in Europe at the same time. other than like say with the troubadours, etc. Dante kind of brings this idea into Europe through his Divine Comedy, but romance is a spiritual thing. When a man falls infatuated or a woman falls infatuated with another man, this is actually an opening. This is a tajalli that is occurring. This is God disclosing itself through that person for that other person. I mean, Ibn Arabi's entire Tarjuman al-Ashwaq, the interpreter of this art, is specifically about this issue in the form of poetry. And his encounter with Nizam, Ain al-Shams, at the Kaaba itself, which doesn't get any more interesting than that. So this is a great thing. And yes, you can psychologize it by calling, the projections of the anima and animus. But, Jung's kind of, the Jungian judgment that kind of gets put as being a pathology is something that the Sufi psychology rejects, only up to a point, however. What it rejects is that if this infatuation leads to, an overfixation of that object without being, without that object in a sense exploding into into the full totality of reality, for the Gnostic realizing that behind this form is God, right? That is where the problem is. That is where the pathology occurs, not in the thing in itself. So, even, the loss of sleep and, the pain and all of that thing is great. Experience it. This is part of the experience of suluk. And in fact, falling in love, which is something that is happening less and less and less and less in our times, is from this perspective, one of the most potent teachers ever on a spiritual path. If you don't have that experience, you are at a very conspicuous disadvantage. So, go fall in love, and even have experiences of unrequited love as much as you can, because these teach you these metaphysical principles better than any text. You're at the point of death. You can't live with this person, but you can't have this person. This is, the tanzih and the tashbih happening at the same time. And really, let these emotions overwhelm you. Have a fana experience out of it. This is great, right? Yeah, and yes, these things can propel you even to the state of madness, but this is the path. These are all the things that all these Sufi texts talk about, right? Modern psychology, judges these things as bad, and we want to get away from it. And nowadays they medicate whoever, shows these sorts of symptoms of love madness. But in this world, these are great things. So what a sheikh or a true murshid does is that with their salik, with their murid, they direct them. They don't shun these things from them unless the person is on the verge of literally physically killing themselves. But they show them how to properly internalize and get deeper and deeper into these things, because these things are theophanies ultimately, that a murid, especially on a path, needs to experience to its full.
Cool, thank you. I like that you talked about unrequited love, because that's what I was going to ask about.
Yeah,
because this is sort of a feeling of being adrift, but it's very interesting that you mentioned that. Yeah.
Well, unrequited love is one of the best teachers there are, and especially for those of us who are really desirous of the haqiqah, it teaches you more about its transcendental nature, inhabiting the immanent, more than anything, any text that you can read or any paradox or whatever. This is a great thing, and to burn into that, in that unrequited love. These are all the stages of the path.
Sidi, I here would like to continue because in the previous sessions we were at some extent little bit critical about the Ismailis, that
Me?
they
No
have
way.
only
Me, critical of
uh,
Ismailis. I love the Ismailis.
no, about one specific idea that they are too much into tenzih.
Yeah,
And here, in the when we are talking about unacquitted love, that isn't it exactly the state of the first intellect who is completely
Boom.
in love of God, but
Yes.
it is the state it
Yes.
can never reach.
Yes. Yeah. Perfect. Perfect analogy. Yes. That's a perfect analogy. Yes. Yeah. I mean, some of the imagery that one often comes across in the poetry, where the heart is torn to shreds. The beginning of Rumi's Masnavi. A heart torn, limb from limb in severance is the imagery that Rumi uses in his Masnavi, right? This is, he's saying this is, if you don't have this experience, you're not alive, provided you've come out the other end of it and haven't completely lost your mind. Yeah, but that's a great analogy. The longing of the first intellect in Ismaili cosmology for his, for the mubde al badaya, yeah, the first principle, beyond all the God, beyond all gods. That's perfect.
Are you talking about the theme of like the separation from God as being like the unrequited love state of suffering? Is that what you're talking about? Or
Yeah, as a symbol, as a living symbol. I mean, like I've been emphasizing throughout this course, as above, so below, taking that Hermetic principle very seriously, that every unrequited love that we experience in this life is a metaphor or symbol for the transcendence of God. But by the same token, you have to also see the simultaneity in that immanence within that transcendence of that experience, right? So these symbols of unrequited love are perfect vehicles for contemplating this paradox of the God-human relationship in one's own life.
because of the suffering, or because of the realization that what you're
All of
really
it.
longing for is God, not the person?
All of it. I mean, well, it's a whole package.
Yeah. What can you, sorry, if it's all right for me to go further, if no one else is waiting.
No problem.
Can you speak about the longing for God, separation from God? It seems like an impossible state. Like in this world, it's like we'll be reunited with God, I suppose, when we die, but then we can't have the conscious processing that we are trying to have while we're alive of that. But is that an ongoing theme, or is it more that separation from God is just living in a state of like a state of perception of being separate from God?
Well, ultimately, it is all a state of perception of separation because it is closer to you than your jugular.
Yep.
In Habl al-Warid, right? It is everywhere in everything. It is both, present and absent simultaneously, which is a fundamental point of Ibn Arabi's metaphysics, is that, whatever we say about God ultimately falls by the wayside because it both inhabits that thing and transcends it simultaneously. So the perfect attitude that the Gnostic must always adopt is one of bewilderment, to be in that state of perpetual paradox, to stand in that bewilderment, right, of the finding and the losing constantly. La ilaha illallah. Which incidentally, the word wujud, existence, comes from the same etymology or the same masdar root as the word to find, wajada, in Arabic.
So do you mean like what's that saying, that may God increase your bewilderment or something? Like
Yeah,
your
may God because the more bewildered you become in this, the more you're actually in the terrain of deepening yourself in the gnosis and getting closer to the ultimate witnessing of things, or many of them. Yeah,
because the world never stops being mysterious. The more you know about it, the more
well,
mysterious
I
it
mean, the
becomes.
world can stop being mysterious altogether. It's the mystery that becomes ever more mysterious in relation to the world. The world.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. that shot around many different ping pong angles, but yeah, in a really good way.
I have a couple of points.
Go for it.
They're not really questions, just observations. Like I'm just looking at the word Hawa and I'm comparing it to the word Hua. And
Yeah.
like what you're talking about right now, to me, is actually a good segue into looking at those two terms side by side, because
Yeah.
it's kind of almost answers the question that's being addressed right now. Like if you look at Hawa as, in the context of being, I don't know, let's put her on the transcendent side and Hua on the immanent side. And is that a half decent approximation of what you're talking about right now?
100%. Whereas now this is a very this can segue into in a very interesting thing. The word hua, even though it's the masculine pronoun, in one of the works of Sofer Azal is Mirat al-Bayan, the mirror of the Bayan. He begins the work by taking the word hua and using that as a masdar, and then deriving 7 forms of hua. The first of which is ahua, so the most ultimate hu, right? And as you move into these 7 forms of hua, you get the word, you're actually getting the word hawa, passion as well. So that the word hua, the pronoun then starts to kind of fluidly become that concept of the passion itself. And I do the same thing on the very first chapter of my own book of the Supreme Names, where we take the hua and derive hawa'a and istihwa out of it.
Okay.
The ipseity is the huwiya, the ipseity itself is that ultimate substance of transcendental passion. Since God is the hidden treasure desiring to be known, right? That desire is the hawa. Yeah.
Okay, great. That's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Is there any truth in that being related to what ended up being Jehovah, Yahuwah?
Well, I mean, the word Jehovah is an artificial. At least it's understood to be artificial construction from what how the Tetragrammaton was pronounced. But interestingly enough, in the Islamic occult texts, it is generally recognized that it is Yahoo. That is, the Yahuwah is or Huwahia is the correct pronunciation of the Tetragrammaton. This is before any modern, formulations of the concept of the Jehovah in the Christian West. Already, like around the 10th, 11th centuries, we have Muslim occult texts, claiming that they know what the correct pronunciation of that was.
Mm.
I had another point that was completely unrelated to that, but and it's controversial, so I'm not sure if I should say it, but
Go for it.
it has just popped into my head when you were talking about the idol worship, basically. And God, I don't know why I have a need to say this, but right now the most pressing idol in the world, it looks like, is the state of Israel. The whole state, the whole concept as a physical location on planet Earth. I just want to spit that out for all the people who are listening besides us.
100,
Take that home. Put it in your
1,000
pipe and smoke it.
100%.
1,000%. Yep. 1,000%. It's the ultimate goal. I mean, Naomi Klein said this earlier in the year in one of her podcasts. She called Israel the golden calf. She outright said this. This is why I love this woman. She's like a female Moses to these Zionist Jews who are not listening to her. Hopefully she'll throw the tablets of the law at their asses soon. But yeah, one of the greatest idols existing today, the golden calf of our time, at least amongst the elite political class around the world, is this colony, this strip of land and the Levant. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. With the elite political class with traditionalist religious beliefs and you know motivations underlying every agenda. Whereas you could say the same thing about um, the secular political class who might not be motivated by such, you know, I don't know, such a tradition underneath them that they're standing on, because there is no tradition underneath them. Like the United States of America, for example, there's another idol that's doesn't have any tradition backing it, but there it is. And what's more important, Israel or the USA? I'm not sure, but amongst the ruling political class, they're pretty much one and the same thing, only in a different context and in a different part of the world. So that's for the Americans listening. But anyways,
No, I mean that is the bottom line. And this is also what is going to destroy it. And it's very evident. This is why I said to people, we're like so afraid of Trump being reelected. I despise Donald Trump and MAGA and that entire, populist wing of this populist wing of Republican. But there's a method to the madness. I saw all of this coming, that he would get reelected, and the first thing that he would do, he would pack his incoming administration with the worst elements of the proverbial swamp, as he's doing now. But what this is going to do, once it comes in, is going to pull the entire house of cards down. That's why I'm telling all my friends stateside, if you can make it out here to Australia, please come, because the shit is going to hit the fan over the next 4 years, and especially the next 2 years, in a big way. The American empire is finished. It is not going to last. They can try, but it's not. And everybody who has their ear to the ground has been seeing this develop. My thing was that if Kamala Harris got elected, this would prolong the empire's agony. Whereas with Trump in and what he's about to do, this is going to pull the whole house of cards down like that. So, the Democrats, the neoliberal wing of the Democratic Party can go sit in the court and cry its eyes out because they lost again, making the same mistake that they made in 2016. But I look at this as an opportunity for us to begin, looking at seriously creating a better world. Because what will come out of this is another problem, and that is going to be the ascendancy of China, Russia, and these authoritarians. And so, as America and the West descends into authoritarianism, the task of the next generation before us is to push back against all of this. I think democracy is a good thing. I don't have much of an opinion about liberal democracy because I think that's a contradiction in terms. You cannot have real democracy when you're privileging capital, because capital wants to dominate and democracy wants to level out the playing field. And these two are opposites. They're not complements. So the whole notion of liberal democracy and the capitalism is a oxymoron. Political theorists see these things, especially Marxists, but most of the West and all these fools and plutocrats, etc., maybe the plutocrats see it, because they realize that this thing, in its liberal democratic iteration is doesn't work. But those of us who actually believe in democratic polity in its real sense, know what this is about. So now our opportunity comes that as this thing starts to crumble and really shows its fangs as its corner, is that we then begin to create these democratic polities. I talk about a lot about my friend Hakeem Bey's concept of the temporary autonomous zone. I think this concept needs to be taken very seriously because it is a very democratic form of being, where you're not answerable to these, authorities. It is people coming consensually together in a space, in an ad hoc space at a given time, and then going about their business and going somewhere else at another time, and then reconstituting again. That means that the revolution can potentially crop up from anywhere, from any point. It's not dependent on any kind of a specific locus. It's a very democratic thing. The very thing that these elites whether the corporate elites of the neoliberal wing of the Democratic Party or these oligarchs of the far right of the Republican Party that don't believe and don't like either one of these two factions.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank
Sure
you.
thing. Yeah.
May I ask a question?
Go for it.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you're fine. Yeah.
Okay, so from your knowledge of, I guess, well, the Bible, perhaps. I mean, I was just sort of hazarding a guess at this, but I sort of feel like there's a fundamental error that's been made in that the promised land already was fulfilled. Like the descendants of Abraham and the monotheists, who were all genetically Levantines, as has been established by gene studies, they do inhabit that area.
Yeah.
You know, that is, the promised land already happened, and the people of Abraham, who I guess the Muslims and Christians who accepted the Messiah, live there. They ended up living there, and so it's this weird kind of misplacement that for those, I guess, for the rabbis, that, because I mean 90% of the Palestinians genetically, they are descendants of Jews who converted to Christianity and Islam. So you can't really say the Jews rejected Jesus because those people are Jewish descendants. But there was obviously, rabbis who decided not to accept him or whatever. And it feels like they're carrying this, like waiting for this Messiah to come.
Look,
I don't think he's going to come.
No, they think he's here now.
Yeah, well, maybe
Is he Trump?
No way.
No, it's not Trump. It's not Trump. But Trump
Some
works
people
for.
think he is disturbing.
But Trump works for him.
Oh yeah, right. That's right.
They think.
They think.
Yeah,
Well,
they do think that, actually.
look, there's a couple ways to look at this. Number one, the Old Testament as the text that we have today doesn't have a pedigree beyond the 3rd century before the Common Era, right? And this text, in the way that it was received up to now, is a production of the scribe Ezra, the very Ezra of our Bezels of Wisdom. And this occurs in the period immediately after the Babylonian captivity. So everything that has been known about the Old Testament up to that point was an oral tradition. This is recognized. The rabbis know this. It's all over the Talmud. So the text of the Torah is from that period of the post-Babylonian captivity. So if this is the case, and if this is talking about a people 1,000, 2,000 years into the past from when this text was put together, right? And this was an oral tradition, where is the evidence for it? Now, one of the silver linings of the state of Israel is that over the last 70, almost 80 years, there has been a lot of archaeology in that area. And not one speck of evidence has come up out of the ground proving any narrative of the Old Testament as being real. Instead, the archaeology and the Egyptology has proven over the last 70, 80 years that there were a people called the Hyksos who invaded Egypt about 1,400, 1,500 years before the Common Era, and that then this group of people were driven out of Egypt by the first pharaoh of the 18th dynasty. Amenhotep the first, or Thutmose the first. I can't remember my readings of ancient Egyptian history. And that this people, the Hyksos, that the academic archaeology claims, were also known as the Hebiru. Right? So if this is the case, and if we are talking about the Israelites here, then actually these people were a bunch of invaders into Egypt, and it took it took a completely new dynasty to push these invaders out of its own territories. And obviously these people ended up in that area of the Levant that we know today, right? So this whole story about them being slaves and captive in Egypt, etc., there's no evidence for it.
Oh, there's no evidence of the Exodus, yeah.
Yeah, if there's no
historical
evidence for the Exodus, if there's not one iota of evidence for the Exodus, then the entire narrative that the Jews of today, the Zionist Jews, have about that land and God, handing them the deed and title to that land to go inhabit is complete nonsense. It's wow. It's pure fabrication. There's nothing. So, from my perspective, that whole thing is BS. And that the Levantine people, whether we take them as the descendants of the Canaanites and the Philistines and the Amalekites and all the ancient people of antiquity that lived there before these Israelites came there, have more claim to indigeneity than these Jews do.
Oh, of course.
And in the modern period, the vast majority of these Jews that originally came from Eastern Europe and Europe, these Ashkenazi Jews, have a ridiculous claim of pedigree to that land. These people are Europeans, they're not Semites.
Yeah, I think it's about 50% of the European Jews don't have any Levantine DNA whatsoever. So it's very confused. It's sort of like, is being Jewish a religion or a race? If it's a race, the Palestinians are Jewish.
Yeah, exactly. And they are much more Semitic than these Ashkenazis are. But I think all of that is a kind of a distraction, because the fact of the matter is that Israel is a settler colony. It's a white settler colony, right? And they came there and by force pushed out the indigenous people off that land the same way that Europeans and especially the Anglo-French did in the Americas, whether in Canada or in the United States.
That's why all their supporters are like the same countries that did that.
Yeah, or what the Dutch and the English did in South Africa. It's the same story.
Do you feel like the second half of the Old Testament is largely about the Israelite effort to dominate other tribes?
Yeah.
Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, it's a pretty fair assessment.
Okay. It seems like it kind of starts to get really into like bloodlines and lineages
But from the point of view of the Bayon that I adhere to, Judaism is an abrogated religion. That the minute that Jesus showed up, the Jews had one duty and one duty only, and that was to recognize him as the prophet and messenger of God for that time. And because they failed to do so, then their entire religion is abrogated. There's no grace running in their creed. He was the Messiah, period. And they had one duty, to recognize him and follow what he said, and they did it. And because they didn't, then therefore that's the end of it. So, Christian Zionists, in my opinion, are heretics from another point of view, is because they are trying to privilege a group of people that, per their own religious perspective, should not have, that aren't a valid religion anymore, even though they exist.
Yeah, it's Christian Zionism is so weird. Like when you read what the Talmud says about Jesus, it's very insulting. It's just like he's burning in hell.
He's burning in a realm of hell, drowning in feces. This is how
feces,
This is how the Talmud describes Christ's state. I mean, this stuff is disgusting, and it just shows the level of hatefulness that these people have towards Christians and Christianity. Whoop.